morning and a very warm welcome to you all, despite the cold temperatures outside. And as we were just commenting, it's a little bit murky this morning, but hopefully nice and cozy where you are. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Amy Thomas and I recruit on behalf of Brewer Morris. And I'm delighted to be holding this morning's webinar with Peter Mason.
Thank you, Amy, and my warm welcome to everybody as well.
Who will be discussing some of the themes in his new book, The Tax Commandments for Business, which I've got a copy here of. Just so you are aware, this morning's webinar will be recorded in case you would like to access it afterwards. Also, throughout the discussion, if you have a question to ask or would like to make a comment on anything that Peter says, please feel free to use the chat button, which I think should be at the bottom of your screen. We plan to do a mix of answering questions during the discussion and also at the end, where we do also have an allocated time just for Q&A. So now then, earlier this year in the summer, in one of my catch-up calls with Peter, where I was probably trying to convince him to look at interim consultancy work, he mentioned that he had written a book on developing and running a successful in-house tax team, drawing upon his own experience. And during one of our conversations, we discussed how it would be a nice idea to come together and run an event where he would be able to discuss some of the themes of his book. Now, maybe, Peter, in our slight naivety of the summer, we discussed how we could potentially run this in our offices with coffee and croissants. But as is the world of 2020, we're hosting it over Zoom and everyone is in the comfort of their own homes. Some of you have already mentioned to me that you know Peter, but for those of you who may not, Peter retired earlier this year as a group tax director from IMI, a global engineering company. And previous to IMI, Peter held senior tax positions at Smiths and Alstom, also global firms. And he originally trained with Andersons. So through his career, Peter has led high-profile tax functions and has also sat on the boards of companies and within committees. So therefore has provided real strong strategic input into businesses. Clearly, this experience places him in an excellent position to write his book, The Tax Commandments for Business, which explains the core elements of tax leadership. And these elements apply whether you're running a tax department at an executive level, leading a tax functional area, such as indirect taxes, or even in charge of a specialist area such as transfer pricing, or really just being part of a team and contributing to the success of an organisation. Now, in Tax Commandments for Business, Peter covers 10 topics, and I'll let Peter give an overview of them shortly. But if I can firstly just welcome Peter this morning.
Thank you, Amy.
And if I can start by asking you, firstly, writing a book must be a huge commitment. So what made you write a book, and especially once you've just retired as well?
Thank you, Amy. That's a great question, and one which I ask myself very often because it has been a lot of work. I've worked for over 30 years leading tax functions in multinational quotey groups. And I wanted to offer something back to the profession and the people working in tax. I want to share some lessons, tips of the trade, good techniques that I feel I've accumulated over many years and certainly have worked for me. So this is not just a tax book, but really a sort of set of skills essential for operating in tax. And to be honest, there's conspicuously little out there on practical tax management. I mean, I actually started writing this book at the beginning of this year, and no one could have predicted the impact of COVID-19 a year ago. Words such as social distancing, quarantine, pandemic, family bubbles were just not in my lexicon before 2020. And masks were for parties, the very thing now that they discourage. And COVID, has changed how we work irreversibly. But the management of tax is still as important as ever, and arguably more so as governments will seek to recoup their consequential massive deficits they're running. So I do believe my 10 tax commandments for business of fundamental techniques and rules in managing tax that are explained in the book endure these changes in our business environment. They hold true even more now than ever before. Amy, I think we will see this more evidently as we progress through this morning's discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you give us a bit more detail on what those 10 skills are, please?
Yeah, certainly, Amy. For me as a tax person, it's mastery in 10 key areas, which spans the role of a tax person in industry. And I call them my 10 tax commandments. And actually, they've been pretty well the same for me over my whole career. Let me base explaining these 10 off the acronym leadership, which has 10 letters. And I'm going to share my one and only slide with you. So if the technology works, I'm just going to share my screen on one slide and I'll talk through that.
Yeah.
Which should now be coming up. Amy, can you see that?
Yes, yeah.
Good. So hopefully everybody can see that. So I want to talk through the 10 letters for leadership here as I've portrayed them in the skills that a tax person needs to really demonstrate. And I start very much with having a long-term view. I think it's incredibly important that you're visionary, you're strategic, you're rising above the detail and looking at that bigger picture to understand the longer term perspective. Secondly, it is so crucial that tax people have a good empathy for others. They challenge others, motivate people, but are sociable, personable, caring, and building winning teams. For A, aptitude for business is very much having a commercial acumen, a customer-driven approach, creative, understanding trade and business, and partnering with business. D, for detective skills, is around evaluating and understanding risk. And you have to have a keen and observant analysis of risk in the tax space. E, for excellence in execution, is so critical that when we do projects, when we do manage programs, we need to be adept in making sure that they are implemented, executed expertly and excellently. R, in running programs efficiently, is that we process enormous amount of projects and programs and taxes in the tax space, that we need to make sure that we're capable project managers, we've got strong execution skills, and we run these processes in a lean and efficient way. Very importantly, to show integrity. In our profession, we need to maintain high ethical standards and responsible behaviours. We need to be honest, we need to have a high level of morality and transparent and cooperative in everything we do. H, for hold accountable, is that we need to be able to understand the decisions we make, logical, analytical, have a good financial acumen. And then I, for influence, we need to be a strong negotiator. We need to be able to influence our stakeholders, and we need to be tactical in the way we manage our arguments. And finally, promises kept. We need to make sure that we live and deliver what we promised to at the beginning. Now, these 10 elements of leadership follow the chapters in my book, which cover the 10 areas which embraces the full diversity of a tax role in management. You may have noticed that tax proficiency is not directly there, but it goes without saying in everything that we do. We have to be competent in our core discipline of tax knowledge. But I cover tax in all parts of this book, but this is fundamentally a practical guide. Amy, I think you can see it is so important that tax people have strong leadership skills to progress in business.
Yeah, absolutely. So in our discussion, we are going to focus on the first two elements, and arguably they could be classed as the most important ones. And that is setting the right tax strategy and also equipping yourself and your team with the right skills and people. So if we can firstly look at tax strategy, so how do you go about, or what do you recommend is the best way of going about setting a good tax strategy?
Yeah, thank you, Amy. The type of tax strategy I want to talk about is delivering goals and performance, not the HMRC definition, which perhaps the tax audience will be more familiar with, which is I'll call tax policy for tax risk management. What I want to talk about is what is your vision of what you personally want to do, want to change and improve in your tax function over the next 3 to 5 years. So you must understand the expectations of all your stakeholders and consult them extensively. I strongly believe that everyone should have a business tax goal or vision at every level in the tax team, and they should all be linked together. Make sure your stakeholders are happy with it. And in fact, when you're in the interview process for a new role, you should be searching for that message. I actually see there's sort of 4 generic groups of stakeholders for tax in a business. The first, probably most obvious group is the upwards group. It's your boss, it's the C-suite, it's the board, it's the shareholders. And we work in a competitive world, and tax people must try to show that they can make a difference. You should have got an inclination of what you want or what they want you to do when you took on the role. In essence, the strategy or your strategy should be focused, it should be deliverable, it should be meaningful and measurable to show eventually that you've made a success of that role. And you want to know the standard by which you will be later judged. So, I've seen typically tax strategy objectives covering compliance, governance, business partnering, structural aspects, value or specific tax projects. We can't do everything, but as we have limited resources, and so we have to be selective and prioritize what we do. Now, the second stakeholder group is very importantly the tax team. And whether you're joining it, whether you're leading it, whether you're part of it, you've got to have the right people in that tax team and the right advisors with it, because they're part of the tax team as well. And this is a global tax team these days. It's all around the world and facilitated with the likes of Zoom, but it's also shared service centers, finance people, and all their views, history and experiences are critical to work out what a tax team is going to do and where it's going to go. The third critical stakeholder is the business. You need, as a tax person, to understand the business in detail. What is the art of the possible? How capable is the organization for change? What's its culture, its expectations? Its unique selling proposition, its geographical spread. There's so many aspects, but you need to embrace yourself wholly in the business. I remember when I was in a head of tax role in an organization, I used to require my tax people to spend a week in a business actually on a production line and understand how products were made. It's very, very important that you can support the business by understanding it with opportunities and avoiding tax pitfalls. The last stakeholder set is arguably the most important to influence your strategy and where you're going, and is the one you should be very acutely listening to, and that is the public, the business image or the reputation of the business. It's mainly monitored by the tax authorities, so it is the engagement with them. Reputation is built in years, yet destroyed in minutes. And so we all worry acutely about keeping control of worldwide taxes, and each type of those taxes which is our responsibility to manage. I remember in one organization, I listed out by country in local language every single tax we paid, and it took up an A3 page on font 8. There are enormous amounts of requirements for the average tax person in business, and we have to fully understand those. So once you've got those important stakeholders under your belt, then you can analyze the tax profile, evaluate your tax contribution and benchmark it. And gradually you'll be seeing as you work through that, the major themes and the major inputs from your shareholders coming to life in the right tax strategy, which I recommend you do right, even if no one's asking for it. Put down at any level what you see as your longer term plan. In fact, I have one CEO who held a quarterly meeting called That 30%. I thought originally that was about the tax rate, but no, it was the amount of time, 30%, that he expected senior management to spend every week on strategy. So Amy, I think you can see how important it is for aspiring tax people to see the bigger picture, drive an approved strategy and differentiate themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And so obviously this quite naturally leads on to people and having the right people in the team. So what do you recommend, or what do you discuss in terms of how you get the right people into your team?
Well, it's critical to be able to deliver your strategy. You have to have the best people, and the people positioned rightly in the team. You must decide the organization of that team first, and what are the skills needed. And prospective candidates need to show that they have them and understand that direction, so they know where they fit in the sort of perfect tax team for each particular organization. It's like a football team selecting all of its players. And it requires both parties understanding very clearly what has to be achieved. And my whole book discusses these skills for tax people, as I mentioned before, with the acronym of leadership. But I think you need to think about how that tax team is organized. And essentially a tax team can be structured geographically, which is perhaps the classical way of having a UK tax team, a US tax team, and so on. Or functionally, which is getting more and more interesting, with perhaps a head of indirect taxes, particularly around Europe, where we've got a common VAT system, or transfer pricing, or a function around M&A, depending on particularly the direction of the business. So a functional tax team, I think, is quite interesting in terms of trying to bring a global consistency to certain aspects. Or you might want to be more commercially driven, and probably is the one I most value, which is trying to align tax people directly with particular parts of the business. Perhaps if there's 3 or 4 business segments, having a tax person responsible for each of those. Now, it might not be a big tax team where you've got all the people to be able to deploy in all those areas, and so you can have some sort of matrix structure of somebody being responsible for one division of the business, but perhaps also a functional area or a geographical area. But I think it's quite important to work out that structure of the tax team and be very clear in your mind how that is fitting with the challenge and direction that those stakeholders we spoke of before want to drive the business. And then that allows you to recruit and develop the right team. And I think every head of tax should garner an environment of support and challenge. And it's important that that framework works so that everybody in it feels energized and challenged, but equally not isolated and not operating alone. And the tax role is changing, whether through COVID, whether through natural evolution. And this keeps the tax function in business always incredibly exciting, challenging, and hugely valuable. Above all, Amy, I think to get the right business people, you have to have a great recruitment process. You work closely with your human resources colleagues, and obviously strong recruiters like Brewer Morris.
Thank you, Rita. Can I just ask you something in relation to the structure of a team, though? I guess, like you said, it's very dependent upon different companies, but what sort of worked for you? You've mentioned geographical and you've mentioned segmenting into different tax areas. What did you find worked well maybe at IMI? Did you go down the geographical route? Did you go down the segmented route?
I think most teams start from the geographical route because naturally people have gained their training in particular jurisdictions. So people feel more of a UK tax person, certainly if they're coming through professional firms. When you get into industry, it's less about the technical skill set. It's still very, very important, but you can buy that in as a resource from advisors. And so people start to gravitate into really trying to deliver business advice, being part of the business, being very close to the business at the coalface, so that tax can be a strong business partner. That's probably my preferred route. And I've always had a head of tax for each of the key business segments. I do think there's certain areas like transfer pricing where perhaps you might pull an economist type person into the team, or VAT, indirect taxes, where it makes sense to have a functional specialist. And so it is a bit mixing and matching as is right for the team as you see the priorities. But mine at IMI, for instance, was structured with a divisional tax directors, a fairly small corporate team, and 1 or 2 country specialists and indirect tax people.
And actually, we've got a question here, which is sort of relating to what you've said. So someone has asked, if you've got any advice on how to manage an inherited team, particularly if they are not on board with new structure and strategy, which I guess is always going to be a challenge, because yes, you've mentioned about bringing in the right people, but actually if you're inheriting a team, which I'm imagining you have done previously, how do you bring those people on board?
Yeah, and that's it's a difficult issue, but it is critical that you get to a point where you've got the right team. Now, some people are capable of changing and taking different roles and moving to a new strategic area. They've got a mindset which will allow that change. Others perhaps less so, they're over specialized in a particular area. And it's like a football team. There's transfers in and out of that team. And it doesn't mean that the person is not good, it's just not right for that particular team. And he'll find, or he or she will find a fit in another team. They are difficult conversations. You've got to be honest, you've got to be straight. And sometimes you may say, well, actually somebody is really good. I don't have a current slot for that person, but I want to keep that person, or I want to make a role for that person because they're hugely valuable. So, you can tweak things for people. I think people are your most important asset, and getting them right, getting the right people is incredibly important to make the strategy sing. But sometimes people move on. Now, I think that all tax heads try responsibly to develop and improve people. And quite often people can't jump a ladder or run up that ladder in the same organization. So they move to another organization. And if that other organization has done their job in training people, people will come back to you. So people move around, and that's right. They'll get different experiences and settle with eventually each person having the tax team that they feel really meets their strategy.
Yeah, it's just being realistic, really, to the fact that you might not always have everybody on board, but you can do what you can to get as many people as you can, and then just expect that there might be some attrition from that. Just moving on then. So we've touched on COVID, and obviously, the resources available to businesses at the moment are quite challenging, and it is a very competitive world. So what do you see as being the typical resources at the disposal of a tax leader?
Yeah, and it's incredibly important, Amy, as you highlight, there are limited resources, so we have to look as wide as possible. And obviously there is the just directly in-house tax staff for part of your team worldwide. That can be permanent, that can be part-time or temporary or project work. That allows a little bit more flexibility. But also don't forget the non-tax financial personnel that can do tasks and can do tax activities when appropriately structured and trained. There's shared service centres in many organizations that you can link into, and obviously outsourcing to providers, advisors, and all manner of other types of help, including increasingly automation. I'll come on to that in a minute. But with all of this, there has to be delegation and trust. You can't do it all yourself. So it is so important that we collaborate broadly in tax with business. And trust has to be earned, and then delegation is deserved. And that is important so that we can make sure that we all have our role, all the cogs work in the system and link together perfectly. And we all have different personalities and abilities, and it's key to try and fit the tax people into the right place in the organization, fit your resources where they can be best brought to your value. And I find it quite interesting to look at deployment of resources in a tax function by thinking about the progression of a transaction, because every tax is based off either a transaction or the aggregation of transactions. And if you look from birth to grave, it actually goes through 10 stages. And if you read my book, there's lots of 10s in it, but there are 10 stages of a tax transaction, from contemplation of the particular transaction right the way through to resolution. And it leads to different types of tax people along the way. So for example, maybe a design phase where it's a little bit more technical, ability to try and apply tax into a business environment. If you're looking at execution phase, you want good project managers, you want people that can actually make things happen. If it's perhaps a health check phase, you need people that are inquisitive and that can detect, that can inquire, that almost auditors. If it's a compliance, a filing, a process stage, you need people that can interpret tax laws, and if you're at the negotiation justification stage, the end of the transaction life, you need good negotiators. I've trained people in negotiation skills in the tax team. So there's lots of different roles, and sometimes people don't look to putting the best personalities to the best paths to those roles. And I think that's quite important to get the best results. And of course, the whole way through this, automation is creeping in. It's a hugely deployable resource. It's obviously just starting, but it's so important that business has a tax technology roadmap. And it's one of those ways to deal with these limited resources in this ever demanding and complicated world. So you see, Amy, depending on the areas of the transactions within business and what they deem as important, there's a wide array of tax resources that people can bring to bear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned automation and robotics, and that area we always see is the takeover of processes is really creating efficiencies in many parts of an organization, and clearly tax is no exception to that. Maybe a bit extreme, but could it be that the role of the tax person in business is short-lived due to areas like automation?
I don't think so, but I think it will change.
Mm-hmm.
I think there'll always be a need for a tax professional in a smart business, but this role is evolving. Every tax person needs to understand the role of technology and be comfortable with it and how best to deploy it, because tax technology and automation is now, we have machine learning that can interpret tax laws. So things are changing. I have worked for some cutting edge engineering businesses over the years, and to be frank, some of them have operated over 100 different ERP systems. They weren't joined up. Included one that managed their trial balance on a glorified Excel spreadsheet. So, it's still taking a little time for technology and automation to get into business, or some businesses. And, it can be difficult to justify the spend on automation because, it requires a lot, and the immediate savings may not be apparent, and implementation can be hugely business disruptive. Generally, I have recommended a sort of crawl, walk, run approach. Tweak additional models in the ERP systems, automated linkage to consolidation systems, advanced macros in Excel, and then you get on to sort of interrogation packages and tax management software, which is important, and possibly automated routines. But that's all before you get into the sexy world of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So it takes time, but beware, the tax authorities are moving ahead in this space. They've digitalized in the UK with MTD. You've got real-time tax auditing in many countries like Russia, Brazil. Virtual invoicing was put in Italy. You can't get paid in Italy unless your invoice has gone through a government portal, which amazingly works. US, has got investigative tax software used by the IRS. And obviously those will be familiar with, BEPS 2 digital, legislating for digital taxes. So tax authorities are moving ahead. So we've got to be acutely aware of this in the tax space. But, I strongly believe you need tax people. And at the end of the day, every tax task can be turned into a standardized process. And I believe one must make those processes efficient first. I'm a passionate believer in lean methodology, and I strongly believe standardization and organization first before automation. Now, you may argue that efficiency is lost in a few nanoseconds of a robot, but the setup time, testing, problem solving, rationalization results, all the things that are corrective you have to do are better if the starting base is lean and efficient. So to stay ahead now, I think tax people need to adapt to become true business partners and advise on trade across a multitude of countries and taxes, because tax people are bright, they're creative, they're capable to see round corners and make those real value judgments. So Amy, I think tax people will endure the robot for quite a few years ahead, because I think tax people are valuable.
Yeah, well, good. And there's a question come up, but I might save that question for the Q&A section, if that's okay. And you mentioned earlier about integrity of businesses and, as part of the tax strategy. And it's been obviously well publicised, but big business has been criticised in recent years for involving tax planning in their trading. And that has damaged reputations. Oh. Is there a risk that, and this again might be quite extreme, but I think it would be a good talking point, is there a risk that tax people may not be welcome by a business?
I think tax people should not fear that if they're clear on their principles and ethics. I have a set of rules which I've kept to throughout my career, and I discuss in my book, and it's kept me, I think, on a straight path, but still providing enormous business value. I call them my eel tests, and I'll leave that if you want to read the book to go through that, but they set out the tests and the tenets that I believe are important in providing responsible and sustainable business value. Yes, obviously in the past, some people have undertaken inappropriate tax planning. I think we would be careful about the pendulum swinging back too far the other way, that we perhaps might lose our commercial mindset. We still have to be valuable to business, and we do have to provide a difference. My advice would be generally be open with business, be direct, be clear, be brave, and that's another acronym actually. So BRAVE for me stands for be in business focused. We do constantly have to be looking to support the business. Risk sensitive. We need to understand the risk thresholds, and business takes risk all the time when they do R&D on a product. There's no guarantee that's going to make the light of day. So we have to recognize there is risk. We need to be adaptable for the A of BRAVE. We need to be capable of adapting to changes in our environment all the time. They're happening quicker and quicker these days. The V obviously stands for value adding. We do need to drive value. We can't constantly be removing perhaps risks that people never knew they had. We need to show positive value enhancing work, that one of those products on the R&D pipeline has to get off the table and into the market. And we need to be efficient. We need to be efficient and use our time well. So that is my BRAVE, business, risk, adaptable, value, and efficient. And my core principles have stuck with me the whole way, and I talk a lot about them through the book, which essentially fall on full compliance, evident fairness, added value, and complete transparency. So compliance, fairness, value, and transparency. And I think they are the core parts of any tax policy. And that, if extolled and explained well, I do think makes tax people able to converse and sit at the table with business to provide yet another element of value to the commercial strategy. So Amy, you know, I think tax management executed well is a benefit to global trade and all stakeholders.
So therefore, that would naturally make you think that tax people, from what you've said, then going the other extreme, tax people can really be good business partners.
Yeah, very much so. I think that's what we should be striving for in business, because, you know, that's obviously what we're supporting. The tax function is very much a supportive role to enable our businesses in organizations to be better. Tax adds value, it secures compliance, it avoids tax pitfalls and identifies opportunities. And tax people are great because tax people understand the legal aspects, they understand the financial aspects, they understand obviously the fiscal issues, the fiduciary issues, and you know, if you couple that with a great business acumen, it's a very powerful combination. And you know, for participants on the call, if you don't feel that you have necessarily all those skills now, they will come along with the tax job, because tax is ubiquitous. It's involved in nearly every aspect of business and at every stage of a transaction. It's a wonderful area to get involved so detailed with all aspects of the business. And you shouldn't be afraid as a tax person to voice your broader rounded business suggestions, not just the tax ones, because you do have huge access to every aspect of business, as I mentioned. In fact, I think it's often is the question of mindset. And I cover this a little bit in the book, in that I think you're looking in a tax team for people that have a very positive can-do business mindset. You want people that are prepared to go that extra mile, that interpret what is required and deliver that with an overall business advantage. In my career, sometimes that's meant me having a worse tax result because actually I thought the overall final business solution was better in a different way, which actually had more tax problems. So, you know, I think tax people should feel comfortable as business partners to sit round the business the business table and contributing as equals with everybody else around that table. So, you know, for tax people, consider all your customers and don't just answer the tax questions. I believe it's you need to develop a two-way dialogue. Understand your business customers' concerns and then help them to ask the right tax questions to solve the right problems. And that makes tax people very, very collaborative and sharing the business success. You know, Amy, I would add that tax skills really transcend all geographies, cultures, business abilities, background. It enables a rich, diverse tax team to be created. And I think this really can add great value to the whole organisation.
And actually, I think some of what you've said may have been partly answered. We've got a question here, if I can just read it out to you. So, how do you deal with the frequent binary risks faced on tax, especially where there is genuine uncertainty and or the worst case scenarios would make the whole project unprofitable?
I generally think there are a few binary issues, right or wrong, on a whole project. Yes, on a particular piece of very specific tax law interpretation, yes, there can be, but often you can work the problem. It's like people say, you know, you can't cut cost and have quality. Well, you can. you've just got to work that problem. You've got to try and think how you can be more efficient but still maintain the quality. And there can be win-win scenarios on these. Too often, I think we see things binary, and I think the ability of a tax person to get in a room, talk the problem through, and try and manage the options by thinking creativity, working the issue with others, and trying to find overall win-win scenarios. I don't know if you want to elaborate the question on that one, whether I've answered what you're expecting, or if there's further on that.
We'll wait to see if there's a comment further. So getting back to what we were talking about, you've got the you've got your exciting tax strategy, you've got the right team organization, but they must perform effectively. So how would you recommend that teams drive performance? And actually that's very relevant for every day, but actually that may be even more relevant for now, with more people working from home, with teams working from home. So how do you really drive that performance?
I'm going to, just before I answer, Amy, I'm just going to come back to that last question. So I'll pause your question for a moment, because I was just thinking, and the other bit I want to add is that the questioner asked about dealing with worst case scenarios that make the whole project unprofitable. And I think that's a really important point, because there can be scenarios where a project looks good on paper and it's in process, and you come to a point where there is a major tax issue, and you have to be brave and get that on the table. You have to highlight that. Don't react immediately. I've seen some people say, oh my God, I've got a problem, react, and then it's not a problem and it goes the other way. You can't flip-flop around. But if there is something major that changes the project plan, you do have to be brave and raise that one and make sure that it is discussed. And it may be in discussing it, it goes away or something changes, but at least you can't let, say it's a major project like an M&A transaction, you can't let that go ahead without putting your hand up on a problem issue. So I just wanted to emphasize that point.
And actually, there's a bit more context here. The additional comment says, my concern was where a tax interpretation may produce a significant tax cost or not, as opposed to most business risks having a range of possible outcomes.
Yeah, I do feel that sometimes in negotiations and arrangements with tax authorities and talking it through, there is more middle ground perhaps than might be initially thought of. Very seldom do you not recognize a risk and then some complete opposite happens. Yes, where there are risks, where transactions and there's a huge grey area of transactions, unfortunately, for tax treatment of transactions, because unfortunately the tax codes in every country can't interpret the sophistication and complexity of business these days. So there is risk, and in every project appraisal you do need to highlight those risks very clearly, and what your countermeasures might be if those risks crystallized. So, if something could go wrong, then you should be entertaining that and thinking about that right at the beginning of the project approval, not just when you're doing something like a UTP, uncertain tax position analysis or something. You need to work that out at the front end so that everybody goes into the project eyes open. And as I say, if those risks crystallize in a very negative way, then you need to make sure that's understood early on. If the project's happened, well, you've got to have mitigation measures and contingency plans. Again, I cover those elements a little bit in the book, but you've got to try and see around those corners.
Right.
So, Amy, I'll now go back to your question on, how do you
team performance?
how do you drive team performance? And, you know, I think it's crucial to target clear and precise performance metrics. And that should all underpin the overall tax strategy. So, you know, if we started from a 3 to 5 year tax strategy at the beginning, you want to dissect that down into clear annual objectives which support that and fit in with that direction of travel. And then within that, there will be various projects and plans that develop, and those equally need to have a clear set of targets to demonstrate performance and achievement of that particular project, and all links together sensibly in the overall direction. Now, I use the SMART acronym for objectives of, you know, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and timely. And I think you can do that at each level. You might have them more detailed on a project and a little bit more general on a 3 to 5 year tax strategy, but it's all making it very, very clear what is required and what good or excellent looks like on a particular project. And everybody in the team should be challenged, you know, to optimize performance and aligned with that overall plan. But, you know, I did make the point earlier, always find the right level of support and care so that, you know, no one must fail. No one, you know, you want to try and stop anyone failing in the process. You want to be making sure that everybody in the team has the opportunity to succeed, and all the projects and everything can move forward in the right direction. And, you know, I guess I can't, you know, overemphasize the importance of managing the team in these days of sort of increasing pressure on tax people, and with less personal interaction. You know, things may not be so evident that everyone should be vigilant for signs of fatigue in the team and mental stress. Because, you know, in the virtual workplace, this can almost get out of hand because there's less, you know, borders or boundaries on the working day and the weekend and the weeks. And I actually think that it's critical to have key performance, but not to push individuals or people to stress thresholds that can be dangerous. And, you know, we all need to think how we manage, you know, our lives and the lives of others in our team and our groups, working groups, to ensure the well-being for everyone. So I actually think that the key to performance is being very clear on purpose and the metrics that will evaluate it. Getting all the team together regularly keeps that on track. I think you can agree a mission for the tax team that focuses on the desired results, and you actually unites the team together. Perhaps as a little side story, I remember back a few years ago when, you know, the tax team had become a little bit demoralized from all of the press stories. It was the time of Margaret Hodge and the public accounts committees. And I had a tax team that was on quite a low ebb. And we got together to try and find a common shared team purpose to rejuvenate the whole team and drive us forward. And we spent a day on working out what we were good at and what drove our performance. What did the business see as our benefits? And we came up, actually it was one of my non-English colleagues came up with the acronym RUM. You can guess I quite like acronyms. It was called the RUM principle for our team. It wasn't that we were a bunch of alcoholics. It was more that we wanted to make tax relevant, we wanted to make tax understandable, and we wanted to make tax manageable for our business to support their success. And it was a good yardstick to measure our performance.
That sounds lovely. And this, appreciating some time, so if just sort of move on to, and very relevant to right now, but we are living in strange times, and you've sort of touched on it a little bit, linking the team together or even business partnering online is a lot more difficult. And actually, just thinking about what you've been saying, you know, making sure people don't almost slip through the net in terms of stress levels. I guess as a communication, you know, how often do you communicate with people in your team? Maybe some more than others, if you can identify weaker spots. But I guess in looking forwards a little bit, how do you see tax teams adapting to this new environment?
Yeah, that's a great question, Amy, because things have changed. We talked at the beginning that COVID has made this a very different world. However, I guess in many ways, some of the things that have happened with COVID have really just been an acceleration of somewhat of the direction of travel. You know, the technology changes, the Zoom call meetings like this, you know, business was starting to go that way. They invested huge amounts in video conferencing in most groups around the world. That, you know, there was becoming less international travel physically and more than meeting up on video screens. It is obviously less personable and it loses that degree of personal contact, but it is perhaps a natural shift, and the shift to home working practices was also coming about. So it's sort of pushed us down a route that we were going anyway. But with that, you've got to have the structures to keep the communication going. And you mentioned communication, Amy, because it is so critical that tax teams and within themselves, but also tax teams with the businesses, maintain the right levels of communication and information flow. You know, business is carrying on, adapting, surviving, and so must we in tax in the way we operate. And I think as a result, we've got to work harder at communication. It may or may not be your natural forte, but I think there's got to be more reasons to call people. And actually, I find I get through to people much easier now. I think people are more desperate to talk to somebody live, you know, rather than see a computer screen.
I've definitely noticed that as well.
And, you know, I was talking to advisors the other day, and actually, you can ring them a lot quicker and get hold of them a lot easier than ever before. And you know, we have to work on our stakeholder influencing channels and sources of tax intelligence. You know, when I was in an office, I would always go and look at the visitors book. I want to know who was in the building. I can't do that anymore. Not like partly because I'm retired, but you know, if I was in a building, I couldn't do that. You know, you walk past all these glass meeting rooms and you're thinking, why is that person in here? You know, it's concealed now with the internet. So you've lost a little bit of the way we could find out what was going on. And so you've got to rebuild those channels. And I think it is dedicating quite a lot of the time of the day to calling people, talking to people. You know, as something in Lean, we always just talk about what's called a Gemba walk, which is where you would walk around a factory, and they recommended management would do that once a day, just to say hi to the workers, hi to the people, find out what's going on, live and breathe the organization. And I used to, in an office, I used to walk the floor, all the floors, good exercise every day, just, you know, chatting to people, saying hi. I found out an enormous amount of information of what was going on, which would embellish my tax role. I think now you have to do that with just making the call, lifting the phone up, speaking to people, or dialing people on Zoom, and making those connections. And it's really important because the risk is that the current state can compromise the effectiveness of tax people. And, you know, you've got to be involved. You've got to be seen to be involved. And it's not just being at the right meetings, it's having those out of meeting dialogues. Meetings are only to decide things, but you need to have made the pitches and convince the parties beforehand outside those meetings, and that still goes true today. So classic influencing skills need to be reworked in the current environment. But, you know, tax people have a depth and breadth of value and skill that should be really visible. Just work hard to make sure that's seen. And good tax management can yield substantial benefits for the organization at a time when, to be honest, it's needed more than ever. Therefore, Amy, I feel tax people must be clear on their strategic proposition, define their mission and their value to business, and then contribute as a well-functioning, collaborative tax stream to drive compliance, value, fairness, etc.
And I think actually what you mentioned about doing your walk around the office, a lot of what we've had commented to us is around the water cooler moments and the loss of those water cooler moments. And maybe it's just booking in phone calls with stakeholders, then it'd be good to have a catch up. And then the thought process will go from there. We've nicely come to 9:30 actually. There is one more question. We've got some Q&A, so if anybody is able to stay a bit longer and wants to ask Peter some questions, please do put them in the chat function. I have got one here which came up earlier, which I'd like to come to now, if that's okay, Peter. And it says, any tips on managing a CFO with an expectation that tax will deliver material savings, which are in opposition to a board's broader objective to be seen to do the right thing. For example, not engage in avoidance, which could be perceived negatively by the public.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you need to explore a bit more fully what's driving the your CFO's questioning, and why they are looking for extra tax savings if they're not prepared to embrace extra risk. Sometimes a fuller discussion might get a little bit more clarity on where or if there are differences of views. Typically, I would expect the finance director to be correctly interpreting the mood of the board, and the board the mood of the shareholders. And you ideally want to be all on the same hymn sheet. That's not to say that that they may feel that the tax area is not taking sufficient advantage of particular opportunities, and in which case you need to align that risk threshold and decide what is appropriate, and your own ethical position. I mean, I'm quite strong on my line, and I will argue that very strongly if I'm pushed against it. I've put my reputation first. So I guess an answer is of these sort of things where there seems to be evident differences, I think talking the problem is so important. It's worth getting around the table and discussing what is the issue. You may not be able to get around the board table on that particular one, but certainly with a finance director, I think you need to flush out really what he's looking for and how far he wants to go. Maybe with examples, it may be with teeing up possibilities, but be open to his suggestions, but try and steer the right way. Unfortunately, I will say it, sometimes the finance person may not be as acutely aware of the current mood in the public arena, and I think you need to make sure that he fully understands all those issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, Peter, I think we've just running a little bit over, so it might be a good time to close. And I just wanted to, do you have any sort of final words at all?
Yeah, sorry. Okay, thank you, Amy. Well, firstly, I think I would like to thank you for hosting this session, and Brewer Morris for arranging it. It's been very enjoyable from my perspective. And for that reason, I'm proposing to offer a discount on purchases of my book before Christmas. There we go. So thanks to Brewer Morris and all their attendees. If you do go to my website, which is www.taxcommandments.co.uk, and when buying, use the coupon code as follows, which is all in capitals and is XmasRush. That's 8 letters, and that's valid up to the end of the year, and that will offer a discount on anyone buying the book on the website. And then finally, I think we need to all be comfortable what we do in tax for ourselves, for our employees, for society. We should be proud of our tax profession. I think it's a great future for tax teams, tax people, advisors, companies, tax authorities, countries, and global trade. And I've tried to impress that in the book, which I hope you'll appreciate. We in tax have a huge responsibility to make business better, to make it more efficient, successful, and enable it to thrive in this new world we're going into. Please keep on doing that, and thank you from my behalf.
Thank you, Peter, for discussing your book and bringing your experience to life and sharing your insights. And I'm sure there is a virtual applause going on out there. And thank you to everybody who's attended as well. If you've got any queries, just drop me an email afterwards. But I hope everyone has a lovely day. So thank you very much.
Thank you.